Hello and welcome to Starcast from Planet Waves. I'm Eric Francis Coppolino, your friendly neighborhood astrologer, here with the edition accompanying the weekly horoscope for Thursday, June 5th, 2025. Big week here coming up, though. In the scheme of things, it is a big week of calmer astrology than we have had. I will say that, in case you haven't noticed, things have been rather relentless for the past few months. There has been no escaping the kind of non-stop, for lack of a better word, intensity, this constant state of change and provocation that has been going on, and it just seemed like way too much all the time without a moment of relief, and we are in such a moment of relief. It's not that there's not aspects going on, it's just that they're gentler, and there also has been quite a lot of build-up to the events of the past couple of weeks, with the conjunction of Chiron and Eris, and Saturn changing signs, and all of that. So now I'm going to run down a few of the things that we've got going on, and I think you'll probably notice that they're decidedly a little more chill. A lot of it involves Jupiter and inner planets, though I would caution that running in the background is something that's a fairly short-lived aspect, but that is significant nonetheless, which is that Venus changes signs on the 6th, on Friday, and it enters Taurus, which is its domicile, sign of it, one of the two signs of its rulership. It is the night side of Venus expressed in Taurus. The day side of Venus is expressed in the sign Libra. That is a masculine sign, and Taurus, where Venus is entering, is a feminine sign. So you might take note that even planets that imply a form of sex or gender, such as Venus, can have both a feminine and a masculine expression. This is one of the ways in astrology that we are reminded that there are no absolutes, and ultimately that ideology in any form falls apart. So astrology is pretty much, it's not that it's immune to ideology. People do pack all kinds of stuff onto the back of astrology and make all kinds of claims. But when you have a planet like Venus with a masculine expression and a feminine expression, you know that you're in kind of a special referencing system where it's important to be sensitive to the specifics of the situation, specifics of the environment. Now, the thing that Venus square Pluto is cautionary of is the obsession that seems to exist with emotional and sexual feelings, sensations, expressed as power. In one of my first therapy sessions, Joe, who became my teacher in a diversity of ways, this now goes back to the early 1990s. In fact, I first met Joe in 1992. In one of our first sessions, he said, basically, you get the choice between pleasure and power. And so when an emotion is expressed as something that is loving, that is about being receptive, being expressive, that's one thing. When an emotion is expressed as the seizure of power over anyone or anything, that's another thing. And they exist at kind of, there's not very many things you could say are in a polarity, but for the sake of discussion, let's say that is a polarity. And so the idea here is that there's something mutually exclusive between tuning into your senses and feeling good and any form of domination. And so we get this image of domination with Pluto taking a square from Venus. Now, that can be expressed a lot of different ways, and There's going to be a diversity of susceptibilities and the projection of power outside of oneself. So, for example, a good way to consider this would be a situation with Venus square Pluto, where someone perceives oneself as the victim of something and has to then project that outward. Whereas the square is much more likely to represent a situation that is calling for personal action, personal inner reflection, rather than simply blaming outside of oneself. And so beware of that tendency to blame, particularly the inclination that seems to be, I think, more prevalent now than any time I've personally ever known or read about, of blaming others for how you feel. Okay, so this starts on 6/6. Meanwhile, Venus is currently anaretic or void of course in Aries. Venus in Aries itself being a very difficult placement, I think, and one of the most difficult, challenging placements in all of astrology, because it is so prone to lack your basic compassion for others and so inclined to basically be solipsistic, self-obsessed. And this is something that is encouraged by digital conditions as well as by digital culture. And so Venus in Taurus, at least it is receptive. I mean, that's the big difference between Venus in Aries and Venus in Taurus, apart from the fact that Venus is inclined to be much more comfortable in its skin in Taurus, whereas Venus in Aries presents certain challenges because really Venus and Aries have basically nothing in common with one another. Okay, so moving on. On Sunday, the 8th, we get kind of an unusual alignment of Mercury conjunct Jupiter. Now that's not that strange. That'll happen a couple of times a year, but it's going to be in the last degree of Gemini. So we have a lot of Gemini going on right now, and that's one of the things that we do have going on. And something happening in the last degree is going to have that edgy feeling. It's going to be indicative of imminent change. There's change in the air when you have planets lining up in the last degree of a sign. And so there's a little message that comes along with the last degree of Gemini, which is kind of like the pageant is over, like the whole show is over, and it's time to get down to real business. And then over the next couple of days, both planets migrate into cardinal sign Cancer, somewhat foreshadowing, or let's say forelighting, the arrival of the sun a little bit later. I'll get to that in a minute. And this reminds me to remind you that the sun's run through Gemini is the sun in a mutable sign, and a mutable sign is always what happens before a cardinal sign. So the seasons are divided in basically conceptually in astrology anyway into three little mini seasons, which is the first one being the cardinal sign, then the fixed sign, which is the peak of the season, then the mutable sign, which is the disseminating phase of the season, the kind of unraveling. And so rightly, with any mutable sign, you have an opportunity to unravel, to transition, and to prepare for the next kind of stage of things. Now, fit this into your life however you'd like to. So, you see a lot of beginnings, or certainly implied beginnings, with planets and the sun, even the moon in cardinal signs, and transitions out of things with such planets in mutable signs. So the sun is making its way now through I'm not sure what degree it's at right now. I don't have one of my chart computers open. I just took notes and sat down here to talk to you. But anyway, track that as the sun moves through what is the ending sign of the season, whether it's autumn season if you're in the southern hemisphere, or the spring season if you're in the northern hemisphere. The time has arrived to prepare for the next. And the next begins with Jupiter entering, Mercury entering Cancer on the 8th, and then Jupiter entering Cancer on the 9th. Now, I'm already 10 minutes in. I've buried the lead of this podcast, and the lead of this podcast is Jupiter is entering Cancer. I don't really feel like redoing the whole podcast. You've gotten this far, so now you have that information. If we were editing, this is the difference between writing and doing audio, at least audio the way that I do it sua sponte. You can't just take your 8th paragraph and move it right up to the lead and airbrush in a little bit of transition. So pretend I began with saying the big news of our moment is that Jupiter is about to enter Cancer. Please, drum roll, fanfare. This is the first time this has happened since 2013. We've gone through one, at least, Cancer to Cancer Jupiter cycle. Jupiter in Cancer is significant for lots of reasons, one of them being that we have Jupiter being exalted in the sign Cancer, so it gets extra emphasis, and it is kind of a boon. It has a bit of the rising tide lifts all ships. It is good for good things. It is good for bad things. And so make sure that you choose that which you want to amplify, magnify, enhance, and cultivate and grow with Jupiter entering Cancer. This is a 1-year transit. The retrograde happens later in the year. And so the retrograde is going to involve, and this goes out, quite a ways out to like October, I think December, and then and then basically this time of year next year, where Jupiter is going to make a series of squares to a thing we've been talking about a lot for the past year, the Chiron conjunction to Eris. So emphasizing that, but we're not there yet. Before we get there, when Jupiter arrives in Cancer, the first thing that it does is it makes a square to Saturn and a square to Neptune. And so one of the things I've discussed in the article that is tacked above the horoscope is that this is a necessary time to be realistic, to be practical. Jupiter square Saturn can have a feeling of a kind of last chance. I get that from the Reverend Dr. Mark Edmund Jones, not the contemporary astrologer Mark Jones, the original, the Reverend Dr. Mark Jones, the guy who channeled the Sabian symbols with Elsie Wheeler back in 1920 or so. And he mapped out the Jupiter-Saturn quadrature alignments. Now, I can't find this. I'm not a big Mark Edmund Jones scholar, but I get it from Isabel Hickey, who was a Mark Edmund Jones scholar. And what Jones said about, the Reverend Dr. Jones said about Jupiter square Saturn is that when it's in a natal chart, it can have the feeling of being a last chance lifetime. This is your last chance to accomplish something that you have wanted to accomplish over multiple lifetimes. So I'm not that... I can read stuff involving reincarnation and previous incarnations, and I do that when I'm called upon to do it, and I require multiple sources of information, not just the chart. You cannot read past life stuff on just the chart. You can get some information, you can get some clues, but like any other major story, you might say, you need multiple sources of confirmation. So the astrology chart can point to some inclinations that seem to come in by way of what I call the reincarnation effect. Setting that aside, we do have this last chance feeling of Jupiter square Saturn, and that's in the mix. And so I would say, rather than accompanying that with a sense of desperation and urgency, consider what it is you've been delaying. Consider changes that you've wanted to make, the things that you need to do. Perhaps you've tried, perhaps you have not been able to concentrate the energy with Jupiter and Saturn in mutable signs. Well, this is the third time through. Last year there were two in the same pattern of Jupiter square Saturn, and now we have the third one. It's taking place in the cardinal signs between Aries and Cancer. That is some mojo. That is quite a lot of energy. That is thrust. That is wind and current and stuff behind you, compared to Gemini and Pisces. I know that Gemini is wind and Pisces is water, so that perhaps was a bad metaphor. There was definitely wind and water with these planets being in Gemini and Pisces, but there's a lot more energy in the cardinal signs. There's a lot more, let's say, the kind of power surging up out of the ground that you get in the springtime when you think about the amount of energy it takes. Like, you just imagine over a couple of acres of land in a forest or something, even a meadow, what it would be like for the earth to push up all of that vital living biomass when the season changes. That's how to think of when the spring comes on. That's how to think of the cardinal signs, is that kind of energy moving up from the ground. So we get that. Now, the cautionary piece of this involves Neptune. So Neptune is in the mix. Neptune is conjunct Saturn. That conjunction is not exact till February, but it's going to be hanging around all through the rest of 2025 and most of the rest of 2026. And so the thing about Neptune, particularly a square of Neptune coming from Jupiter, is to fact check, to be realistic, to actually know when you don't know. Now, this is more than we can ask of most people. Most people just assume that they know. That's it. They know, they're experts, they're never wrong, despite the last 100 times that they were wrong or really, really, really wrong. And Jupiter square Neptune is saying you've got to be able to see into your blind spots. How do you know you can see into your blind spots? This is complicated, and it really involves training perception. It involves the ability to explore things from multiple points of view, which, by the way, is one of the great gifts of astrology, because there are 12 houses and many planets and 12 signs. Just the use of astrology begins to, in a sense, compel you to look at things from multiple viewpoints, to see things from the opposite viewpoints, and in the case of something like Jupiter square Neptune, you have to keep asking yourself, how do I know this? Now, there are people who do this intuitively, instinctively. They're always checking, how do I know this? But for example, my primary line of work was journalism. You write that article line by line, sentence by sentence. You know, at least if you're working for a reputable news organization, that article is going to go through editing, and then it's going to go through fact-checking, which is an internal verification process. That means that you have to know where you get every fact. You have to know the source of every last thing that you say. And so in common speech, right, in common talking and emailing and social media and things like that, where there's no expectation that anyone is going to verify anything you say or ask you how it is you know that, well, you have to ask yourself how you know that. And I'm not talking about like making posts to Instagram, but I would strongly suggest that you apply a high standard to your social media posts or your Facebook posts. I know I live in a fantasy world. I know that this is the Wayne's World of Eric Francis, where people actually care whether what they say is true. But fuck me if I'm wrong about this. So the point here is that this pertains to things besides your social media posts and besides just the usual bullshit. What this pertains to is the major decisions that you make, because we see that underlying this whole thing, this whole business, is some kind of major activity, some major change, thought process, reevaluation, assessment, possibly a huge decision of some kind. That is Jupiter square Saturn, but Neptune is involved. And so you have to have a way, if you feel like making the right decision. Look, you may have 10 years to waste. I mean, more power to you. If you feel like you could waste 5 or 10 or 15 years by making a decision that doesn't really work out and that just kind of leads you down kind of a road to nowhere. But if you're not interested in that, if you actually want to know, whether you're making a good decision based on the best probable information that you have, check yourself. Ask yourself how you know everything. Read the fine print. Verify the things that people say. Make sure the things people ask you to do are, for example, legal and moral. Don't agree to anything that you don't understand. If there's one line in the contract or one line on the invoice, question it. Question it. We have to outgrow this kind of meekness and this trust of authority at all costs, and the refusal to challenge people and to challenge things, and ask the most obvious questions. Usually the best fact-checking questions are obvious questions, but the most obvious question is, how do you know that? Okay, this is all leading up to the full moon on the 11th of June. We'll come back to that next week, and we'll go forward to that next week, and then the summer solstice, or at least the northern solstice, on the 20th of June. So overall, one turning point after the next, one point of decision after the next, here in this disseminating phase of the spring season, in the northern hemisphere, autumn season in the southern hemisphere. A few house announcements before I go. First thing is the mid-year reading is happening. This is called Easy Does It. The mid-year reading is going to kind of sort of leave the minor planets behind for a while and look at the major planet sign changes involving Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all of which are changing signs as we speak. This is a highly unusual situation. I don't remember anything like this happening ever before. I'm sure it has. I'm sure the people at Astro Computing Services could tell me a time when all the gas giants change signs within a couple of months, but that's happening right now, and that will be covered in Take It Easy, the mid-year reading from Planet Waves by me. Additionally, the Drops of Jupiter reading is ready and done. This is a two-part video reading. First part is an astrology reading. This is the newly enhanced split screen chart on the screen astrology studio type of reading for the sun's transit through Jupiter. The birthday reading used to be called the birthday reading. This is also wonderful for anyone who is born under the sign Cancer having a birthday. We can send it to them for you as a gift, or all of those who, like myself, are Cancer in the ascendant, and while we're on the sign of the moon, the Cancer moon. So this reading will cover all this stuff, Jupiter in Cancer, as well as Saturn and Neptune working the career angle of the sign Cancer. This is a very big time for those born under the sign Cancer. And then there's a tarot reading. I have now made the decision. Video got me to do this because tarot is so much more visual than astrology, to have an add-on as a tarot reading. And I'll be doing some tarot classes, and I will be doing other forms of tarot readings, and look for on the YouTube channel for various things involving tarot. I have dusted off my decks, and will be introducing how do you know what a card means? How do you figure out the meaning of a card? The star, strength, whatever, the chariot, whatever it might be. I've got a method for doing that is pretty much guaranteed to unfold the card, and you suddenly understand this concept, this idea from a multivalent perspective. You got to be able to see a lot of sides of things in the esoteric arts, because it's very easy in the esoteric arts to kind of get caught in a rut and to bring your own beliefs to the work rather than letting the esoteric work get you out of your previous beliefs and experiment with different viewpoints. And that basically means staying awake and not being jammed into the corner of your own ego. And then there was one other thing. We did the You Know More Astrology Than You Think class on Saturday. That was fantastic. We filled the class up. We're going to release the first hour or 45 minutes or something of the video, make the full class available for purchase. Then the next class is going to be in early July. I believe that is the 11th, and that is the Born in the 60s class, which will be followed by Born in the 70s, and then the 80s, and then the 90s. We're going to go decade by decade through these classes, and one of the things I'm doing now is going to be offering lots of different classes. I'm looking for any opportunity to pass on what I have learned in these decades of doing this very work for you. All right, I think that is it. Signing off from the Hudson Valley of New York State. There will not be a Planet Waves FM tomorrow night. I am taking the week off. I did all the shows in May as promised, and I'll be back a little bit later, kind of with a show right around the time of the full moon. All right, now, for real, signing off from Hudson Valley of New York State. I'm Eric Francis. Lots of love, and bye for now.